Hello and welcome. Before we begin, feel free to subscribe and let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from, and how are you feeling today? Your presence here truly matters. They say the dead leave silence behind, but William left me a storm. 1,400 acres of land, $55 million, and a name now weighed down with strangers' voices. For 25 years, I believed I knew everything, until a knock came, quiet as dusk, and with it, the ghost of a son I never bore, and a past I was never meant to survive. I wasn't wearing black the day the lawyer read the will. I'd already done my mourning years before, in small private increments, watching William forget names, forget days, forget the way home from the diner we'd gone to every Sunday for 20 years. By the time he passed, I was too exhausted for theatrics. I wore navy, quiet, practical, something that didn't announce grief, but didn't deny it either. The conference room smelled like laminate wood and stale coffee. I sat in the middle, between two people who didn't want me there. On my left, his daughter Nancy, stiff as starch in her blazer, lips pursed so tight I thought she might swallow them. On my right, her brother Don, eyes bloodshot, jaw working like he had gum but no place to spit it. They didn't say a word to me, not even a nod. I'd been warned. Our lawyer, Mr. Halber, a man with more ties than expressions, had told me, "They're contesting before they even know what's in it." I said I wasn't surprised. They'd never hidden how they felt about me. "You were the nurse," Nancy once hissed at a Thanksgiving, after too many glasses of wine. "Not the wife." William had gripped my hand under the table so hard I could barely eat, but he never said a word to her. Not then. Mr. Halber cleared his throat and began. The language was dry, full of hereby and to wit, but the meaning cut through like a scalpel. Everything. All of it. The ranch, over 1,000 acres of stubborn Texas soil. The mineral rights, which meant oil. And the money. $55 million, give or take whatever the markets had done that month. All of it left to me. Nancy stood up so fast her chair screeched. "This is a joke," she barked. "This is elder abuse." Don didn't stand. He just stared at me, like I'd walked into their house and stolen the silver. I didn't flinch. My hands were folded in my lap, fingers curled into each other like roots. I'd held William's hand as he died. They hadn't even called. When the room emptied, I sat alone for a few minutes. Not because I needed time to process. I'd known what was coming. William and I had gone over it, again and again, especially after the diagnosis. He didn't want them to have it. Not the land, not the legacy, not one drop of what he'd built. "They want the reward without the weight," he said one night, when his tremors were starting to worsen. "You carried me through the worst of it, Ginny. It's yours still. Knowing doesn't shield you from how cold people can get when money's involved." The calls started that night. Don, first. Calm, lawyerly, trying to sound rational. "We just think maybe Dad wasn't in his right mind." I told him William was sharper than either of them when he signed that will. Then Nancy, 2 days later, crying. "You know he would have wanted us taken care of." I reminded her William had paid off both their mortgages, bought college funds for their kids, and still got called "that bastard" every time his name came up at their holiday tables. She hung up. I stayed on the ranch, 1,450 acres, and every inch of it felt like him. The fields he used to walk, counting fence posts like prayer beads. The creek where he fished and swore at the mosquitoes. The barn we repainted one summer when the contractor flaked, both of us laughing like kids, covered in red. I kept the same housekeeper. Maria and her grandson mowed the lawn on weekends. Nothing extravagant, just quiet. There were days I'd sit on the porch with my tea and wonder how people could get so tangled up in resentment. William and I had nothing when we started. He was coming out of a divorce, bitter and broke. I was a single mother working nights at the hospital and days at the library, running on caffeine and instinct. He came in with a busted wrist and left with my number. The rest was just grit. We worked. We saved. He got lucky with land leases and oil rights. And we didn't waste it. We built a life that was solid, not flashy. I wore the same coat for 20 winters. He drove the same truck until the engine finally mutinied. We weren't stingy. We were deliberate. Still, people talk. They always do when an outsider ends up with the fortune. The mailman started knocking instead of just dropping letters. The clerk at the grocery store began calling me ma'am with extra weight. Friends from the bridge club asked more pointed questions. So what will you do with it all? I told them the truth. Nothing drastic. The same house, the same coffee, the same flannel nightgowns. Money doesn't make you new. It just makes people notice. I donated to the county library, started a scholarship in William's name for kids from ranch families, bought new insulation for the church even though I hadn't set foot in it in years. Quiet things. Things that didn't make the paper. And still, the resentment festered. Nancy and Don kept trying to find loopholes, hired their own lawyers, dug into my background like they were hoping to find dirt. They didn't. I've never been arrested, never missed a tax payment, never borrowed more than I could pay back. I pay cash for my groceries and tip well. That's who I am. But they couldn't stand the idea that that woman, me, was the one their father chose. Not just at the end, but all the way through. I remember one afternoon, months after the will was finalized, sitting on the porch, reading an old gardening catalog, when Maria came out with the phone. "Someone for you," she said, eyes darting. She didn't say who. It was Lillian, from the county clerk's office of all people. "Virginia," she said, her voice careful, "there's been a filing. Someone's contesting the original will, claiming your late husband had a child not accounted for." I didn't speak. I looked out at the land, the cattle grazing like punctuation marks in the distance, the trees William planted near the old fence line, the dirt road that led nowhere unless you knew where to turn. "A child?" I asked finally. "Yes," Lillian said. "Born about 25 years ago." I didn't feel my hand shaking until I realized I'd crushed the catalog in my lap. The air had shifted. Not sharply, not loudly, but like a tremor before the quake. I thanked her, set the phone down, and stared out across the ranch. 1,450 acres, $55 million, and a ghost I'd never seen coming. The wind had picked up by the time I stood from the porch chair. That brittle kind of breeze that doesn't cool you down, just reminds you something's coming. I left the catalog where it was, crumpled in my lap, and went inside to find the folder William kept in his old desk drawer, the one labeled, "Personal, do not open." He wasn't dramatic by nature, so when he labeled something like that, you listened. I opened it with the care of someone disarming a bomb. Inside were letters, some yellowed, some newer, a few photos, receipts from motels that didn't match any of our trips, and a single envelope, unsealed, addressed to me in his handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. I stared at it for a long time before unfolding it. It wasn't long. "Ginny, if this ever finds you, it means I didn't get the chance to explain things myself. I made mistakes before you. Big ones. I tried to make them right, but some things don't stay buried. If anything ever comes of it, know this. I never lied to you about what we had. You were the only thing that made me want to be better. W." It wasn't an admission, but it wasn't a denial either, and it landed like a crack in the floor beneath me. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the old ranch house settling. My thoughts were running so fast they couldn't land. 25 years ago, he would have been nearly 60. We were married by then. He'd slowed down, traveled less. But not entirely. I remembered one business trip to Oklahoma. He was gone longer than usual. Came back quiet. I chalked it up to an oil deal gone bad. He never brought it up again, and I didn't press. Love, it turns out, has blind spots. Or maybe we teach it to look away. By the next morning, the papers had started. The Austin Chronicle ran a headline: Texas oil widow faces surprise inheritance challenge. A black and white photo of me from a charity event 10 years ago, pinned next to a grainy image of a young man in a hoodie. No name, no details. Just the words, alleged son. I tossed the paper in the recycling without reading the rest. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Nancy. Of course it was. Well, she said, not even pretending to sound surprised. Looks like Dad had more secrets than we thought. I didn't answer. Don and I always said there were things he kept from us. But I'll be honest, Virginia. I didn't think you were one of them. Her voice dripped with something that tried to be polite. It failed. You can take your schadenfreude elsewhere, I said. This isn't a party for you. She scoffed. I'm just saying, maybe it's time to stop pretending you were the saint in all this. I hung up. Later that afternoon, a knock came at the door. I almost didn't answer. But I did. It was a courier, young and sweating in the late heat, holding a manila envelope. He had me sign for it. I shut the door before he could ask if I was the Virginia Jameson. Inside, a formal notice of intent to file for paternity recognition. The name on the document was Joshua R. Blanton, age 25, filed through an attorney out of Houston. The petition stated that Mr. Blanton was the biological son of William Thomas Jameson, conceived during a temporary reconciliation with Mr. Jameson's first wife, Linda Blanton. I sat back in the armchair, documents in hand, and stared at nothing for a long time. Linda. That woman had sent us Christmas cards for 3 years after the divorce. Then silence. I hadn't heard her name spoken aloud in nearly 2 decades, and now here it was, printed in black ink on a legal threat. I went into the garage, found the box I kept my own records in. Birth certificates, marriage license, property deeds. I thumbed through them until I found the envelope marked Will Final Copy. William had signed it in front of 2 witnesses and a notary. I remembered the day. He was tired, but lucid, sharp enough to correct the lawyer's spelling on the second draft. He'd made sure every dollar, every acre, would go to me, and no one else. But this was a wild card. I knew enough about probate law to know that if Joshua could prove paternity, he might not even need the will. Texas law could entitle him to contest the entire estate, depending on the timing and the judge. And worse, if the public got behind him, the court might lean sentimental. A lost son, a grieving mother, a wealthy old widow, with too much. I called Mr. Halber the next morning. He'd already heard. They're moving fast, he said, not even wasting a greeting. DNA test request has already been filed. They're going to try to subpoena a sample from Mr. Jameson's preserved medical files. Can they do that? With a judge's approval, yes. I didn't ask what the odds were. I asked what we could do. He said we'd fight it. Start with blocking the exhumation, then push for dismissal based on the statute of limitations. But he didn't sound optimistic. Not entirely. Even if they lose, he said gently, they'll win in the court of public opinion. This is a narrative people love. I hung up and walked the length of the house barefoot. The floorboards creaked with a language only old houses know. Outside, the fields shimmered with late summer heat. Everything looked the same, but I could feel the story shifting beneath it. That evening, I poured myself a bourbon, something I hadn't done since the funeral. I sat on the porch, watched the sky turn tangerine and then bruised violet. I didn't cry. I didn't have the energy for it. Instead, I stared down the dirt road until it disappeared into the trees and said, out loud, to no one in particular, "All right, Linda. Let's dance." The day the test results came back, I didn't answer the phone. I let it ring until the machine picked up, the message cutting off halfway through because I hadn't changed the tape in months. Halber left a voicemail anyway. "It's confirmed," he said. "He's William's son. Call me when you're ready." I sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of soup I hadn't touched and listened to the hum of the refrigerator like it was a metronome. My hands were folded in my lap, wrists aching from the morning's arthritis flare. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just nodded to no one and thought, all right, so it's real. The boy's name, Joshua, felt like something I should have been familiar with. But I'd never heard it until now. Not in passing. Not even in one of William's half-muttered regrets. He'd told me he had no children beyond Nancy and Dawn. He'd said it flat, with the finality of a man who believed his own edits to history. But the thing about history, it always leaks. The media didn't wait. 2 days later, a photo of Joshua was plastered on the front page of the Dallas Morning News under the headline, "Forgotten Son or Fortune Seeker." He wasn't a child. Not anymore. 25. Tall. Brown eyes like William's. The same crease above the nose when he frowned. I saw it even in still images. That wrinkle of concentration that used to show up when William read contracts or tried to open a stubborn jar. The press loved him. They called him soft-spoken. "Grounded," one article said. A working-class kid from Galveston who never asked for a dime. They interviewed his mother, Linda, outside a modest yellow house with a drooping porch swing. She wore a long denim skirt and a careful smile. "I never wanted drama," she told the camera. "I just wanted the truth to come out. For my son to be acknowledged. As if that were the same as cutting him a check big enough to buy a city block. I avoided the grocery store. Sent Maria instead. When I finally went out, a woman at the gas station handed me my receipt with a tilted head and said, "God bless you, Miss Virginia. You're being so strong, I wanted to ask her what she meant. Strong for not screaming? Strong for not kicking over the gas pump?" Halber kept me updated, but always with the voice of a man walking a client toward a cliff. "They're moving for discovery," he said one afternoon. "They want access to all of William's financial records, medical documents, personal correspondence, anything that shows intent to exclude Joshua." I laughed, but it came out brittle. "You mean anything that shows he didn't know about him?" He sighed. "Virginia, they're not trying to win on paperwork. They're trying to win on sympathy." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling fan, wondering how many summers I'd watched that same blade spin while William drank iced tea and read the paper beside me. The hardest part wasn't the court. It was the silence from my own family. Nancy and Dawn had gone quiet, not because they supported me, but because they hoped I'd fall harder. I'd overheard Nancy tell someone at the club, maybe this'll finally show she wasn't some saint. Maybe Dad had his reasons. As if the worst she could imagine wasn't betrayal, but my humanity. One night, unable to sleep, I dug out an old VHS tape. William's retirement party. The year before his diagnosis. I watched it alone in the living room, sound low, lights off. There he was, standing tall, hands in his pockets, making that same dry little speech he always did when people clapped for him. "I didn't build this alone," he said. "I had people who kept me sane, who kept me grounded." Then he looked at me. Just a glance. Not long. But it was real. And I knew then he hadn't lied about what we had. He just couldn't carry the weight of what came before. I brought the tape to Halber the next day. "Can we use this?" He watched it twice. Not in court. But maybe in people's minds, the courthouse was an old sandstone building with a squeaky metal detector and a front desk clerk who called me darlin', like I was his grandmother. I sat through the first hearing with my spine straight and my jaw tight. Joshua was there, in a navy suit that didn't quite fit, looking nervous. He didn't make eye contact. I didn't expect him to. His attorney was younger than I'd imagined. Slick, confident. Referred to William as the decedent, like he was a pile of papers instead of a man who built something from dirt and diesel. Halber kept his responses calm, measured. That's why I hired him. Because if I'd opened my mouth, The words would have torn the paint off the walls. They requested a delay, said they needed more time to gather affidavits, character references. The judge, a woman in her 60s with an expression carved from stone, granted it. "We're not here to rush," she said. "We're here to get it right." Outside, reporters waited. I didn't speak. I just walked to the curb and climbed into the back of a black sedan Maria had borrowed from her nephew. The window was cracked. The air smelled like fried onions from a food truck parked across the street. It all felt surreal, like I was starring in a movie I never auditioned for. Back home, I poured a bourbon and stood at the kitchen sink, staring out over the land. The fields were dry, thirsty for rain. The sun sat low, bleeding into the dirt like fire. I thought of the letter William left me. I thought of Linda, sitting on her sagging porch. I thought of Joshua, fidgeting with his cuffs in court. And for the first time since this started, I felt something that wasn't just anger or grief. I felt the first ember of something sharper. Resolve. The bourbon hit a little harder that night, not because I drank more than usual, but because my stomach was already sour with suspicion. Something had been scratching at the back of my mind since the courthouse. Something in the way the slick attorney smirked when he mentioned financial disclosures. It wasn't just confidence. It was knowledge. Inside knowledge. I didn't sleep much. The kind of night where your body lays still, but your mind plays out every conversation you've had in the past 6 months like a courtroom transcript. At some point near dawn, I sat up and said aloud, "No one leaks without a hole somewhere." The silence that followed felt like agreement. By 10 a.m., I was in the study, flipping through the drawers where I kept my paperwork. A few months back, I'd noticed the safe wasn't locking quite right. I'd told myself I was being paranoid. That was before Linda's attorney started quoting property holdings I hadn't mentioned even to Halber. I pulled the logbook I kept. Yes, handwritten. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. I know what QuickBooks can hide. I compared the dates of when certain assets had been moved into the charitable trust William and I set up in his final years. Nothing matched. The dates the court had were more recent. Too recent. I stared at the discrepancy until my hand began to ache from how tightly I was gripping the pen. I called Halber. Asked him how sealed our filings were. "Tight," he said, "unless someone with inside access has been talking." I didn't say anything right away. I just looked out the window toward the long gravel drive that split the pasture like a scar. "Do you think someone's been talking?" I asked finally. There was a pause. "I think someone's been bought." I started with the obvious. My children. Or rather, my children by blood. Rachel and Andrew. They hadn't been part of William's family, but they'd benefited all the same. I'd helped them both with down payments on houses, paid for my granddaughter's student loans when the market crashed. But lately the calls had slowed. The thank you notes stopped entirely. I was no longer mom, just, "Do you mind?" I called Rachel first. She answered on the third ring. "Hey, Mom. Everything okay?" "Have you spoken to any lawyers lately?" I asked. There was a pause. Too long. "Why would I—" "Don't play dumb with me, Rachel. I wiped your nose and watched you cheat on your geometry homework. I know your silences." She huffed. "Well, if you must know, someone approached me about a possible opportunity. Nothing serious, just a hypothetical. About your estate." They were very respectful. I closed my eyes and let the shame bloom where the rage wanted to take root. "And you just chatted, did you?" I said. I didn't say anything important. "No, Rachel. You said everything. You told them I was soft, that I'd cave, that I'm too old to fight." She went quiet. I hung up. Andrew didn't even pretend. When I called him later that afternoon, he launched into a pre-rehearsed speech about being caught in the middle and what's best for the family long term. "You mean what's best for your pocket?" I said. "That's not fair, Mom. You don't need all of it. You're sitting on more land than you can even walk across." That land isn't just dirt, Andrew. It's my life. Well, maybe it's time to share it. That's when the nausea turned into a clean, cold resolve, the kind that doesn't rise in your throat, but settles in your bones. The final blow came that night. I'd gone to bed early, left the porch light on. I woke up to a notification on my phone, an alert from the security system William had installed after the first round of estate threats. Someone had tried to open the back door. The code entered was wrong. Twice. There were only 4 people who had that code. Me, Maria, Rachel, and my oldest grandson, Matthew. I called Maria first. She'd been asleep, across town with her sister. No question there. Then I called Matthew. "Grandma?" he answered, his voice thick with sleep, or pretense. "Why were you here last night?" He didn't deny it. That was almost worse. "I just needed to grab something. I thought maybe the code hadn't changed. It has now," I said. He started to say something else. Something about how I could have left something for him in the will. I hung up before I could hear it. I wasn't going to waste breath on betrayal wrapped in entitlement. The next morning I got in the car and drove to Halber's office. The building was cold, windowless, painted in a beige that screamed confidentiality. I placed every document on the table: the trust, the property deeds, the retirement accounts, the bank statements, and said, "We lock it all down." He nodded. "Are you sure?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I don't want my own blood near a cent of it until they prove they bleed for more than inheritance." He got to work. By the end of the week, we'd shifted the charitable trust into a new structure with independent oversight. We added a clause to my will disinheriting any individual who contested my legal directives in bad faith. We filed a motion to block the discovery request, and I revoked every power of attorney, banking authorization, and property access, retroactive to the beginning of the year. Rachel called. I didn't answer. Andrew texted a long apology that ended with, "Can we still talk?" Not today. Maybe not ever. That night, I made myself soup again. I even managed a few bites. Outside, the wind was kicking up dust across the pasture. The cows huddled near the edge of the fence, their shapes soft and lumbering in the dusk. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I felt sharp, tempered, like a knife that had been cleaned of rust and laid flat on a table. Let them come. Family, lawyers, ghosts, whoever thought they knew what I would do. I was done playing defense. I didn't ask Halber's permission. I didn't even tell him. Some things a woman does on her own terms. I had Maria set the table for 2, nothing fancy, just the old ceramic plates with blue trim we'd gotten for our 10th anniversary. William always liked how they felt solid, not fragile. I poured sweet tea, laid out roast chicken with rosemary and garlic, and waited. At 6:30 sharp, a car pulled into the gravel driveway. I watched from the window as the young man stepped out. Tall, lean, shoulders a little hunched, like he was bracing for wind. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like someone still deciding whether to knock or run. I opened the door before he could choose. "Joshua," I said. "Come in." He hesitated. "You sure?" "No," I replied, stepping aside. "But here you are?" He smiled. Just a flicker. Then stepped over the threshold. We didn't talk at first. I motioned to the table. He sat across from me, awkward with his hands, like he wasn't sure if he should fold them, hide them, or use them to build a shield. "You're not what I expected," he said, glancing at the food. "Neither are you," I said. "Eat." "It's hot." He nodded and picked up a fork. For the first 10 minutes, it was just chewing and the occasional clink of cutlery. Then I spoke. "Why now?" I asked, voice steady. "Why wait 25 years to show up?" He set down his fork. "I didn't know." Not until a year ago I raised an eyebrow. My mom never told me, said it didn't matter, that William had made his choice. She married someone else when I was little. I thought he was my father. Then he died and, well, she broke. One night she told me everything I studied him. He didn't fidget. He didn't cry. He didn't perform. So this whole court thing, this is your idea? He looked ashamed for the first time. No. A friend of hers knew a lawyer, said I had a right to know where I came from, and maybe be part of something. She doesn't want money. Neither do I. I almost laughed. You don't want money, I said flatly. Yet here you are, with a lawsuit that could take half of what I've spent a lifetime building. I didn't file anything until they found out about the inheritance, he said quickly. My lawyer ran with it. I didn't stop him. That's on me. Damn right it is. We sat in silence again. Then I stood, walked to the hutch, and pulled out the envelope, the one with William's handwriting. I placed it in front of Joshua. I wasn't going to show you this, but I need you to understand something. He opened it, read silently. His brow creased in the same place William's used to when he concentrated. He didn't know, I said. Or if he did, he buried it so deep even I couldn't reach it. But what we had, me and him, it wasn't a consolation prize. It wasn't second best. He chose me, fully, loudly. Repeatedly Joshua nodded. I believe you. I studied his face again. He wasn't trying to manipulate me. He looked like someone who had spent most of his life trying to belong to a story that had already ended. I'm not going to ask you to drop the suit, I said. It's your right. And frankly, it's probably too late to stop the machine your lawyer started. But I want you to understand what this costs. Not just money, not just property. It costs memory. It costs peace. He looked down. I didn't mean to take that from you. But you did. The room went still. Only the soft ticking of the wall clock filled the space between us. He stood to leave. I didn't stop him. At the door, he turned. For what it's worth, I'm glad I met you. I nodded. Go home, Joshua. Before you let someone else speak for you again. When the door closed, I didn't sit back down. I went to my office, opened the drawer, and pulled out the paperwork I'd prepared that morning. A formal deed of gift. The mineral rights for the north edge of the property, untapped but valuable, transferred into a new trust. Not for Joshua, not for my children, for a foundation in William's name, dedicated to rural education and land preservation. Irrevocable, permanent, out of reach. The next morning we filed it. That same day, Halber called, his voice rising with surprise. They're recalibrating. The other side. You just took $20 million off the table. Good, I said. Let them do the math on dignity. Later, when I stood on the porch and watched the sun drop behind the hills, I felt something unfamiliar settle across my chest. Not peace, not pride, relief. I had finally made a move that didn't react to anyone. It belonged to me. Relief. That's what it was. Not joy, not triumph. Just a quiet lightness where the dread used to sit. The silence in the house didn't press on me anymore. It exhaled. The day the final ruling came down, I didn't go to the courthouse. Halber called just after lunch. The judge upheld the will, but recognized Joshua as a legal heir under Texas law. That meant his name would go in the public record as William's son. He'd receive a settlement, not from the estate, but from a portion of funds that had been voluntarily offered by the family trust. That was Halber's idea. It made the court happy, the press calmer, and it kept them all away from the rest of the ranch. I listened, thanked him, and then I went outside and watered the potted plants on the porch. Tomatoes and lavender mostly. Simple things. Roots that didn't ask more of you than sunlight and attention. 2 days later, I called a realtor. I'd lived on that land for over 3 decades, knew every creak of every floorboard, could navigate the house in the dark. I'd buried pets here. scattered William's ashes under the sycamore tree he planted when we renewed our vows. But lately, the walls had started to feel like witnesses. Too many memories stacked like furniture I could no longer use. I want it sold as is, I told the realtor. No staging, no fuss. Just put a price on it and let the vultures fight over the rest. She blinked but didn't argue. In Texas, land talks, and mine had more stories than most. I packed slowly. I didn't take much. A few framed photos, the hand-sewn quilt from our first winter together, a stack of William's old maps that still smelled faintly of tobacco and leather. I left the rest. I didn't need the weight. My new place was a condo in Austin, small, clean, with a balcony that caught the morning sun and overlooked a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon by 8 a.m. I could walk to the library, the grocery store, and the little diner where the waitress calls everyone honey without it sounding fake. Maria cried when I told her. But who'll take care of you out there? I'll take care of myself, I said. For once. The first week was quiet in a good way. I joined a book club, took a free Tai Chi class at the park, started writing down memories. Not for a book, just for me. I wrote about William, about the children when they were small, and still looked at me like I held the sun in my palm. I even wrote a few lines about Linda. Nothing cruel, just true. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Handwritten, no return address. I recognized the careful slant of the handwriting immediately. Dear Virginia, I've thought about our dinner every day since we spoke. You didn't owe me kindness, but you gave it anyway. The lawsuit was wrong. I see that now. I've withdrawn from the settlement. I want nothing that was never meant for me, but I would like to stay in touch if you'll allow it. Respectfully, Joshua. I didn't cry, but I did sit for a long time, holding the letter in my lap, letting the edges dig into my thighs like something grounding. I didn't respond right away. Maybe I never would, but it felt like closure, or the beginning of a different kind of page. The next morning, I went down to the bakery, ordered something called a Texas honey roll, and sat by the window. The light hit just right, warming my face, the sugar melting on my tongue. Outside, cars passed, people walked, and the world spun on, unaware that somewhere in that movement, a woman had finally stopped holding her breath. I didn't have a ranch anymore, but I had my name, and no one was ever going to take that from me again.